you. Can you turn up the volume for me, Shana, please?
Oh,
Can you hear me, Michelle, at this point?
Absolutely. 10 out of 10.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, Council. I'd like to call this special Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Today we have a guest. Former Mayor McKee is here representing the Royal Canadian Legion, and he is going to come forward and present poppies to Council. Mark, come on up.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Council, for allowing me to come. I am the chair of the management committee for the Legion, and I wanted to prize you of Remembrance Day week and give you poppies and encourage you to join us on November the 11th. One quick thing I would like to say is that I volunteered to be the chair of the management committee, like a lot of people in the community did. Councillor Devon is one of those on our management committee, because we're all there because of how important the Legion is to the community, not just on November the 11th, but every day of the year. It's part of the social fabric of the community, and it plays an important role through the bargain basement, through the lounge, through the top floor, which is rented out to clubs and events. But it's a place for local people to gather and to socialize. And that's just a small part of what we do. Of course, the cenotaph represents the other part of it, and which is what Remembrance Day is all about. So having said that, I wanted to just hand out these poppies to all the council and mayor. And the CAO can get one as well, since I know that he's extremely underpaid.
thank you, and thank council. Thank you, Kurt.
There. And I have a special one for you.
Oh, amazing. Thank you.
Councillor Clark, on behalf of council, we'd like to make a donation to the Legion, the Poppy Fund. Thank you so much for what you do. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
I can direct all of council to the community shop your poppies. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mark.
You guys all get your copies? We're trying to get as quick as possible. I know what it's like being in budget meetings. You're just dying to get in there and dig into those numbers.
Oh, yeah. See, Mark.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for the donation as well.
Girl. All right, council, I would like a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. If someone want to make that motion, Councillor Devlin, Councillor Cherry, all in favor? Motion's carried. We're going to move right on to announcements from the mayor. I want you to bear with me here this afternoon. I have a fairly lengthy announcement that I would like to make to all of you and to the community. Some of you are well aware that 2024 has been a complicated year for me regarding my health. And as of a year ago, almost to the day, I had heart stents put in my heart. And a month later had a gallbladder attack. And with that gallbladder attack came several visits to Kelowna General Hospital for what they call ERCP every 3 months, which was a stent put in my bile duct to get me through to August of 2024, where I could be off blood thinners for a period of 5 days prior to having my gallbladder removed. So when they take any part out of your body, they send it for pathology. Pathology came back with not great news as of August, and I have been diagnosed with an extremely rare form of cancer. So with that, when they say rare form, it's usually 2 to 3 people in a million. With me, it's 2 to 3 people in many millions that have this cancer. And now I am scheduled for an extremely long surgery on November 12th. And I will be out of the office for 2 weeks, be in hospital for 2 weeks following that surgery. So when I say cancer, most people think terminal. This is not a terminal diagnosis. I want to make that clear. My surgeons, oncologists, and physicians, the entire care team are very optimistic for longevity. So I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the support of the community. To the community, I want to make things quite clear. We have a stable council. They will carry on things as we normally do, even if I'm not sitting in this chair. Acting mayor is Councillor Luciao, and we've had a conversation. He's graciously accepted the challenge to take on my work during November and December. I'm grateful for that. Councillor Stapenhurst will deal with my CSRD commitments and the North Okanagan Hospital Board commitments. And my intention is to be back as soon as I can. However, I don't know what that's going to look like at this point, so I will need a bit of time to heal. So for those of you in the community, as I mentioned, we have a stable council. They will carry on the work. We have a great staff. They will carry on the work as they normally do. And my commitments to the community will be taken over by our council. And I look forward to getting back to coming back to work. I thank you for your support. My wife will need support, so I thank all of you who will be able to reach out to her as this has been quite a shock to our family. However, my children, my grandchildren are all well aware and are very supportive. So I thank you all for listening to me. Again, I look forward to a great outcome and moving forward. So thank you again for your time and for the work you do for our community. All right, we're going to move on. Ms. Moore, I will turn bad news over to good news because you're going to tell us that we're going to come up great with our budget. Thank you.
That's good. Thank you, Your Worship. I will start by sharing my screen. And my understanding is this is the only item on the agenda.
That's correct.
So there's no adoption minutes. Okay. So everyone in front of them should have a paper version if you wish to reference directly from that, or I will have it up on the screen. And essentially today we'll be talking about the 2025 budget, which is a 15-year long-term financial plan. And at the end of the meeting, there are motions for going for community engagement. And essentially the format of this presentation will mostly be in the draft long-term financial plan document, but I do have some slides prepared just to prompt us of everything to go through. So is there any questions before I start, or I'll just dive in?
Any questions, Council? Dive right in.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, so today we'll start off by talking about the assumptions used to prepare the draft budget before you today. We'll talk about 3 different taxation scenarios that are before council for possible recommendation. We'll go through the long-term financial plan base and core budget, so through all the departmental based budgets, plus the changes to the core budget that make up the 1.25% increase. We will do a review of the spending packages and other projects. These are all the same as what was presented to the Finance Committee at the first 2 weeks of October. And then at the end of this, we have next steps, which are the motions in the report, which is to proceed to community engagement. Okay, so for the assumptions, we've applied a standard 6% inflation rate to all general service revenue. So this is permitting, licensing, recreation fees, essentially the fees and charges bylaw that came before Committee of the Whole in October. And so if we do not continue with the 6% inflation rate for that fees and charges bylaw, we will need to make adjustments to the draft budget. We've applied a standard 4% inflation rate for all of the wages for 2025, and this is based off of the collective agreement negotiated with QP last year. And as for everything else in the budget, like contracted services, general supplies, other expenditures, we have applied a standard 3% inflation rate to those expenditures. I know that inflation has been volatile over the last few years, so in the next budget cycle, I'll be reassessing where we're at in terms of inflation and what's reasonable on a long-term basis, as we've seen it move around quite a bit in the last few years. And then finally, we're working under the assumption that the development cost charges bylaw will be adopted by spring 2025. So that's the final piece to there. And with that, we'll now move over to the long-term financial plan document. We'll start on pages 10 to 11, which are the tax scenarios. If you wish to move in the physical book, it's page 10 that we're looking at. It's large enough for you to see on the screen.
Yeah.
So we've got scenario 1, 2, and 3, similar to previous years. We're looking at 4%, 5%, and 6%. The recommended tax increase this year is the 6% on the higher end of the 3 scenarios. This equates to $128 per the average single family home in Revelstoke. I've pulled data from BC Assessment, and it is currently for 2024, the assessed value for a single family home is $839,000. We have the utility fees and charges in here at 5% for everything except for garbage and refuse services. So the CSRD has increased our tipping fees in the last year. So that is what that relates to. It's gone from $80 a ton to $90 a ton. So you can see the corresponding increase for the average single family home here. And at the bottom, we have all 3 scenarios. Scenario 1 is the 4% tax increase. So that equates to $174 for the majority of the community and $128 for Big Eddy. 5% is scenario 2, which is $196 for the majority of the community and $150 for Big Eddy. And then the recommended scenario 3, the 6% increase is $217 on the average single family home and $171 in Big Eddy. Moving on to page 11. This is the total taxation per $100,000 of assessed value. So sometimes it's difficult for either residential properties or commercial taxpayers to compare with the scenarios before. So right now, per $100,000 of residential assessed value, it'd be $255 of taxation. And for $100,000 of commercial assessed value, it would be $1,278 in taxation. So now what makes up the 4%, 5%, and the 6% tax increases? So the 4% is the core budget changes of 1.25%, which we'll go through the details here shortly. The operating spending initiatives were brought forward to the Finance Committee the first 2 weeks of October, and no additional increases for transfers to reserves for the arena. The 5% tax increase is the first 2 line items are the same, with a 1% being transferred to the arena, and the 6% property tax increase is 2% transferred to the arena. If we move down a little bit here, we have what 1% is equivalent to for property taxes and other services and utility rates. So the key one here for property taxes, 1% is equivalent to $161,000. So in scenario 2, this would be equivalent to an additional $161,000 being transferred to the arena redevelopment reserve in perpetuity annually. And the 2% is approximately $322,000. Are there any questions about the scenarios before I continue on?
Councilors, any questions? Seeing none, let's carry on. Thank you.
Okay. Page 12 for anyone who's following on the paper version. Otherwise, it's up on the screen. We have the last 4 years of history, 3 years of actuals in 2024 budget. And then we have the draft 2025 budget and the next 4 years in the plan. And you'll see that all the graphs for the operating budget look this way. And this just gives you the history of what the rates have been and what percentage increases correspond with those. And as for the highlights of the garbage and general fund, essentially, we have 32.1 million in revenues and cost recoveries. We have 25 million in operating expenditures, 6.7 million in transfers to reserves, and $635,000 in debt payments, debt servicing costs. We'll just move over to page 13. This is where we have these pie graphs that represent how much we're collecting in each type of revenue and how much we're spending in various expenditures. So you can see that for the city in their general operating fund, so this does not include utilities, the bulk of our revenue does come from taxation and grant in lieu of taxes. We do have a fair amount of conditional grants that are received and other service revenues that make up the total 32.1 million. If we go down to the next pie chart, this breaks out how we spend it amongst various departments, how much we're transferring to reserves, and how much we're paying in debt payments. So this is just kind of a visual of where all the money is going. Anyone have any questions before I get to the core budget changes?
Seeing none, no?
Oh, okay, I'll keep going. Page 14 for anyone who is looking at the paper copy. So this is essentially a summary of what makes up the 1.25% required for the base budget. And we'll start with the revenues. So in 2025, or from 2024 to 2025 is what I should say. In 2024, we had more new construction revenue than what was budgeted for. So it came in significantly higher due to the new development in the city. So this resulted in an additional $595,000 in tax revenue. The grant in lieu of taxes increased by about $135,000. Our business licensing revenue increased by $116,000. This is primarily due to short-term rental business license fees, user fee and permit inflationary increases, so another $410,000 there in increased revenue. Our return on investments have increased due to higher interest rates of about $480,000. And then we have another section of other small various increases. So the total revenue in the base budget from 2024 to 2025 has increased by 1.77 million. And that is equivalent to negative 10.95% tax increase. That's the 161,000. However, it is offset.
Sorry.
So the wages and benefits, we have seen an increase in $729,000. This is related to, we didn't have the collective agreement negotiated prior to the last budget cycle. We had everything in there at 3%, which was inflation. The union negotiated a 4% increase plus a 1.25% inflationary bump. So this has resulted in wages increasing by 5.25% from 2024 to 2025. There were 2 positions added outside the budget. One is for the building official position, the second one, which was offset by increased permit revenue. And then as we transition the GIS department and to work towards the next Gen 911 requirements, we added a second GIS position. The internal equipment costs increased by $65,000 for the fire department. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the fire fleet has increased with inflation quite drastically and above other inflationary pressures. And so we've had to do a second adjustment to increase the internal equipment fees in order to fund the fire fleet to replace it. There's been an adjustment to the RCMP contract to increase it more than inflation due to their lower vacancy rates and successful bargaining within their union. So historically, they had a vacancy rate of around 2 to 3 positions. Now they're seeing more like 2 to 2.5 or around 2. So we have an authorized strength of 14, and they often hit around 12 FTE throughout the year. So there's an adjustment made for that. And then I have the rest of the inflationary increases for expenditures at 3%. So with that, the total expenditures that increase in the base budget are approximately 1.4 million and equivalent to an 8.9% tax increase. Oops. And then down to this last section at the bottom, we have estimated new construction revenue for 2025 at $250,000. This is something that we won't have more information on until 2025. We'll get a completed roll at the beginning of January. However, we don't get the final revised roll until the beginning of April. So even last year with our completed roll, it changed a fair amount between January and April, just with so much development and classifications moving around and whatnot within the community that we're not really getting final numbers now until April, the beginning of April, and it's less reliant on the completed roll. I would say that this 250,000 is conservative. I just don't know what the number is, and it would be a shame to overestimate and have to figure out what we're cutting. So at the moment, it's 250,000, but we may see additional tax revenue in the new year that we can allocate accordingly.
Councillor Luciano, you have a question?
Yeah.
And then every year we increase the transfers to reserves by about 5 to 7% to try to build the reserves more and address the cost of inflation of construction projects. So transfers to reserves increased by about 770,000. Oops, let me scroll down. So that brings us to 530,000 net for this section and a 3.3% tax increase. And then of this whole page, the total net increased cost is 217,500 and a 1.25% base budget increase that is required. Is there any questions before I move on?
Mr. Parliament.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, question, the way I read this, if you go to the top there for 2024 new construction at roughly 595, if I read this correctly, that represents almost 3.7. If it weren't for growth, we're looking at not a core of 1.25%. We're looking at a core of 4.5%, close to 5%, plus new ask, plus arena. So really, when I read that whole thing, growth is what pays our bills, which we know in local government, but in this case in Revelstoke, our increasing costs, our collective agreements, or our CMP contract, growth is critical.
Correct.
You know, what I call non-market growth, construction growth, yeah. And even though you pegged it at 250, which I like is conservative, we hit 600 in 2024, shielding the tax bump, basically. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would say in 2024, that was our highest growth year in taxation yet. So 250,000 is approximately the average in the last 5 years or so, and that's the conservative approach. However, yeah.
600, well,
Mhm.
If I can.
Yep.
To the chair, just for clarification, what was the previous average home price in town last year?
801,000,
And this year was 837?
839.
Thank you.
If there are any other questions about the core budget changes, otherwise I'll move on.
Carry on, thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to the utility funds, which is for everyone on the paper version. I'm moving over to page 15. And here we have the graph of the last 3 years of actuals, the rates and the percentage increases. The water fund and water utility rates have stayed consistent at 5%. There was just the no increase in 2021 and then the catch-up increase in 2022. For 2025, they're sitting at $624 with a 5% increase for a single family home. And so some of the highlights of the water operating fund, we have a 5% increase per year, as noted above. Due to the larger construction and new development in the community for the next 2 years, I've increased the growth rate to 2% from 1% and then put it back down to 1% to try and accurately reflect how much new revenue we might get. And then the fund over the years has seen increased vehicle and equipment charges due to inflationary pressures of vehicle and equipment. It also has a standard 3% annual inflation increase applied to everything. And there's about 1.9 million being transferred to the capital reserve for future capital projects in 2025, and it grows to 2.8 million by 2029. Moving on to page 16. These are these similar pie graphs where in this fund, as you can see, the bulk of it is user fees. We do have some interest in other revenue in here and one LAS agreement where we receive $20,000 of revenue every year, which is a local area service agreement. And this makes the total operating budget annually 3.7 million. And then moving down, we have the operating expenditures annually at 1.6 million and the transfers to reserves at 1.9 million for the water fund annually. And then debt servicing right now is approximately $130,000. So these are the debt, principal, and interest payments for the water fund.
I have a question about that. Sorry, through the chair.
Go ahead.
Is it more beneficial to keep higher transfers to reserves or to make higher transfers to debt repayment?
So through the chair, the way that our debt servicing works with MFA, Municipal Finance Authority, is at the time of renewal, we are allowed to pay the debt off in full. So every 5 years it renews the debt. However, we're not allowed to make increased debt payments to pay off the principal faster.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understood then.
Yeah. Okay, so the Big Eddy Water Utility Fund. This is a similar graph with the last 3 years of historical, 2024, 2025 draft budget. The rates as they move along. For Big Eddy, they had the 0% in 2021, 3% in 2022. So we did have to do that catch-up year in 2023 of 15%. And this fund is on the same trajectory of 5% per year increase. In 2025, the annual draft utility fee is $601 for a single family home, which is slightly less than the regular water fund. That was, I believe, $624. So. And the Big Eddy Fund, they have similar increased vehicle and equipment charges over the last 3 years, a 3% inflationary increase. They have approximately 131,000 of annual debt servicing costs. This is all being recovered from the local area service agreement, which relates to the new or upgraded Big Eddy water plant from 2018. And on an annual basis, in 2025, we are transferring $72,000 to the reserve, and that is increasing to $102,000 by 2029. So at the end of the 5 years. Okay, moving on to page 18. These are the similar pie graphs for the Big Eddy Water Utility Fund. The total budget for this fund is substantially smaller, as it is a smaller water plant and services a smaller area. It's $389,000 in total revenue and cost recoveries. We collect $230,000 in user fees from the Big Eddy. And the rest of it, this $131,000 is for the local area service agreement and a small amount of interest income. And for the operating expenditures, we have just under half of it covering the operating at $186,000. The debt servicing is quite a large portion due to that project in 2018 and the local area service agreement. And then the transfers to reserves at $72,000. Okay, so moving over to the sewer utility rates, similar graph. We've got increases that are substantially different historically. So we had the 0% in 2020, and then in order to fund the reserve and prepare for the wastewater treatment plant upgrade costs, we did a 30% increase in 2022, a 20% increase in 2023, and now we're sitting at a more stable increase of 5%. So in 2025, for a single family home, they are paying $594 in sewer fees. As for the highlights for this plan, I will note the growth rate I've also changed to 2% for 2025 and 2026, and then back down to 1% thereafter. This is to try and more accurately predict the new development, new construction coming online with fees versus building the reserves. And very similar inflationary increases as the last three funds. We have $2.2 million being transferred to the sewer capital reserve in 2025, and this builds to $2.8 million by 2029. So the sewer fund looks slightly different. The total revenue is $3.8 million, which it now brings in more revenue than the water fund. $2.8 million is from user fees. We do have a frontage tax, which is a parcel tax, being charged for sewer users, and that's $702,000. And the rest of this is through DCC recoveries from the last wastewater treatment plant upgrade to pay for the annual debt servicing and interest and other revenue. And then when we get to the expenses and transfers to reserves, as you can see in terms of the total pie and budget, The operating expenditures make up a smaller pie piece in here. And we've had to more aggressively save and transfer to reserves to fund the sewer projects and upgrade. So the total transfers to reserves is about 2.2 million for 2025. And the current debt servicing is about 250,000. So that takes me to the end of the utility operating funds and base budgets. Does anyone have any questions before I move on to vehicle and equipment?
Just as we move forward, Ms. Moore, with the wastewater treatment expansion upgrades and whatnot, will that have any bearing on us having to make any changes to our long-term plan, transfers, that sort of thing at this point, or it'll go ahead as we've got planned? And then if there's something else that will be brought to council, is that correct?
That's correct. And to clarify, we've got phase 1 of the wastewater treatment plant in the plan with the existing rates and transfers to reserves. We're looking to take out about $4.2 million in debt, which in the future, when you look at this pie graph, once we're done the upgrade, this debt servicing cost pie piece is going to get bigger, and then this transfer to reserves is probably going to get smaller, as we'll have to pay the annual debt costs for the upgrade. However, with the phased approach, we do have phase 1 in the plan. However, depending on when phase 2 needs to be completed, how much that's going to cost, how many DCCs we've collected, and what grants or other funding mechanisms we have, we may have to consider future additional increases to the sewer fees. However, at the moment, we do have the first phase of the upgrade reflected within this base budget.
Great, thank you for that clarification. Appreciate that. Any other questions, council? Seeing none, let's move on. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so this is the vehicle and equipment operating plan. And essentially what the city does, which is a little bit unique in comparison to the private sector, is we charge out all of our vehicle and equipment as an internal cost recovery or revenue. And then all of the expenditures and maintenance are covered through those internal charges, and anything remaining is transferred to reserves. Vehicle and equipment has seen substantial increases over the last few years. We had to do a 40% increase between 2022 and 2023 to the internal fees, which then impacted the general operating fund. We've had to do specific increases related to the fire fleet above and beyond that. So there was a $110,000 increase in 2024 and a $65,000 increase in 2025. And at the moment, we now have it where we have about 1.5 million being transferred to reserves, and by 2029, 1.7 million. And so at the moment, the entire fleet for fire and the rest of the city is being funded through reserves and not debt. However, depending on when things need to be replaced and how much further inflationary pressures go with the vehicle equipment, we might have to reassess. But at the moment, they are funded all through reserves through these increases over the years.
Councilor Steveners?
Question through the chair to Director Moore. Just what's the overall impact on the budget if we add a secondary station, as we've seen later in the presentation, fire station wise? Because I know a station isn't really much good without any apparatus or personnel to equip it.
Through the chair, that's a great question. And one of the reasons why it's currently on the unfunded list is we're working through all of those costs with the consultant of how much would it cost to build a second fire hall, what needs are for the second fire hall, how do we equip the second fire hall, what year would we potentially build it in? And with that information, and within the fire master planning document, we can come back to council and say, okay, here's how much it's going to cost to start saving and funding the second fire hall. However, at the moment, we're still working through those costs. And I know that things in the construction industry have been quite volatile along with the equipment and whatnot. So that's a bit of a process that we're going through right now, and hoping that for the 2026 budget, we can pull that off the unfunded list and have a funding strategy within the budget.
Great, thank you, appreciate that.
Okay, so this is the total cost recoveries or internal revenue for vehicle and equipment. So the fire department, it's 465,000, and then everything else, which is public works and other staff members, is 2.3 million. And over to page 22. This is how it's divided up between transfers to reserves versus ongoing annual maintenance expenditures. So fire annually, we transfer 314,000 to reserves, and the annual costs for maintaining the fleet are 169,000. For all other vehicles and equipment, it's 1.1 million transferred to reserves and about 1.1 million in annual maintenance expenditures. And that makes up the 2.8 million operating budget. Okay, are there any other questions about vehicle and equipment? Otherwise, I'll move on to the departmental base budgets.
Any other questions? Seeing none, let's move on.
Okay. Okay, so we'll flip to page 25. And this will start with the council 5-year financial plan with historical actuals. And for reference for everyone, these do not include the current spending initiatives. These are the current base budget that make up the 1.25%. So any of the requests that are on that spending initiatives list that we reviewed in October are not included in these numbers. Those are above and beyond. Okay, so this is the base budget for council. You'll see in 2022 and 2026 are election years. They have little spikes and look a bit different. We have moved around how we allocate software expenditures, which is part of the 23 to 24 dip and then back up. And in 2023, the increase is related to the council remuneration review. And as for the highlights, everything in here is subject to the increase of the 3% inflationary costs. And in 2025, there was an increase related to providing extended healthcare benefits. This makes the total draft budget for council on an annual basis to be 370,000. Do you have any questions before I move to the next page?
No.
Okay. And so for simplicity purposes, this is 3 separate departments, but they've been combined into one page. So this is corporate services, human resources, and technology and GIS. This is on page 26. What I do with all of the departmental budgets is I put in an org chart that reflects what's in the budget, since wages are often the highest operating cost for the operational budget. So this is a visual of what staff members make up this budget, essentially. So here's the org chart here for the 3 departments that are fit into one for simplicity purposes. And here's the same graph of the 3 years of historical actuals. We don't have final numbers for 2024 yet, so I've put the budget in here for these graphs, and then I have the draft 2025 budget. And as you can see, things have moved a little bit from 2023 to 2025, and there's been a few reasons for that. So one is we have moved how the software costs have been allocated. So it all used to be run through the IT department, and then we allocated them to the department that they relate to. So it's the true cost of that department is reflected in terms of software. In 2024, the top Revelstoke spending initiative was approved, and the communications coordinator position. We have also restructured where GIS used to sit within engineering, and now GIS sits within IT.
Right.
So that's one reason why you're seeing this graph here in 2025 go up substantially. Those make up the variances, and then after that, it's the standard 3% inflationary increases. So the total budget for these three departments is 2.4 million in 2025, and this 450,000 in revenue is related to the CBT Ready program. Okay, I'll move on to finance unless there's any further questions.
Go for it.
Okay, page 28. So this is the org chart for the finance department. So there's 6 FTE total. And in here, you'll see the same graph with 3 years of historical and 2024 budget. We've seen some variances in this one too in the historical actuals related to vacancies and positions. Other than that, the budget has stayed fairly consistent. We did go out for RFP for the external audit of the consolidated financial statements, and we did have to increase our audit fees. So we did increase the budget slightly for 2025 due to that. On to engineering and public works. So they've got a total of 36.5 FTE and 5.75 seasonal positions that are funded through this operational budget. And moving on to page 31, similar graph. In 2022, the bar is higher for 2 reasons. One, it was a higher snow year, and 2, we shifted how we record small capital. It used to be funded through operating, and now it's being funded through reserves. The other item to note, which is impacted possibly the most with the internal equipment charges and fees, is the 40% increase from 2022 to 2023. It's public work. Public Works uses a significant amount of the equipment. All right, moving on to page 32. In last year's org chart, it was infrastructure and planning was one larger department. The 2 have now been separated again. So we have development services and bylaw as their own department now. The total FTE is 12.2, not including a grant position. This position is being funded from the $187,000 that we received from the province related to the bill updates last fall. Yeah. We've got a similar graph here. However, we do see some variances over the years. So this department has been restructured twice in this cycle, so that is causing some variances in wages. It went from being included with engineering or on its own to being included with engineering to not being included with engineering. And one of the other reasons for a reduction in costs in previous years was the vacancy of the building official position. However, all building official positions have been filled now and continue to be maintained. So in 2025, we've got 1.1 million in budgeted revenue and 1.1 million in total costs. As for bylaw, we have an increase in 2024 budget, which is related to the spending initiative of another bylaw officer from 2023 or 2024. And so that has increased this bar. And the long-term plan over the next 5 years has similar inflationary increases of 3% for expenditures and 4% for wages. I will make note, with the increased enforcement, we did increase the revenue slightly in 2024 and 2025. Okay, I will keep going. We've got the CED department. We've got 3 FTE and 2 contractors in the budget. And page 36, you see the graphs grow over the years. This is primarily due to the MRDT and OAP funds increasing. So in 2021, they were quite low due to the pandemic and low or high vacancy rates. And we see the revenues grow over the years and expenditures since we contracted out substantially. This is related to expanding to collecting to Area B and increasing from the 2 to the 3% collection rate, which results in a net increase of 2.8% for the city. So in 2025, we've seen this budget grow a lot. So in 2021, it was 1 million in revenues and 1.4 million in expenditures. It is now 3.2 million in revenues and 3.5 million, 3.6 million in expenditures. We do have, going forward, a provision for the use of OAP funds for affordable housing initiatives in this budget. I'll keep going unless there's any further questions. Keep going, okay. The Parks and Rec Department, their operating budget includes 23.1 FTE, 16 casuals, and 1 contractor. We have a similar graph here, and similar impacts with the pandemic, where things were lower in 2021, the historical actuals, and we see them recover over the last few years. And the parks specifically have seen a larger increase with the vehicle and equipment inflationary costs. I will make note that the total revenue that we're expecting to see in 2025 is 1.3 million and total expenses of 4 million. This is aligned to the 6% user fee increase for user fees that are coming forward to council next week. So for fire rescue, we have 11 FTE, 1 grant funded position, 26 volunteer firefighters, and a contractor in the base budget. And we see the similar inflationary pressures here as well with the vehicle and equipment, increased wages. And in 2023, there was an approved spending request of another career firefighter. And for RCMP, there are 21.5 positions. Some of these are provincially funded, some of these are municipally funded. As for RCMP officers, this is the authorized strength of 14 that I was speaking to earlier. Oftentimes, their vacancy is about 2 or so FTE. So we're often seeing about an average of 12 to 12.5 RCMP officers working.
I got a question here if I can.
Yes.
To the chair or even to the chair. Do you have any update about having the province fund extra positions in our community? There was a conversation about that at UBCM 2 years ago, last year.
Yeah,
What is an update?
we spoke about it again this year in a different way. So last year we talked about highway patrol members. This year we spoke with Staff Sergeant Dodds before we left for UBCM. He wants provincially paid members here on general duty because the highway patrol don't help his membership and just look after the highway. So we approached them on that preface, and the comments from the Inspector General for the province said, yes, we'll look at that. And one of his staff members was there who said she was going to communicate directly with Staff Sergeant Dodds and do an analysis with him. And so they're working together on that sort of thing to see how many. So that's kind of where we had left it. Haven't heard anything further.
Okay, it'd be good to follow up to see if we can get some more money out of the province here instead of more impacts of taxation.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that comment. Any other comments, Council? Saying none, let's carry on this one.
Okay, so similar graph for the RCMP. 2022 actuals look low. However, this is an adjustment related to retroactive pay that was finally resolved after many years, and the city overestimated how much they had to pay. Otherwise, for the most part, we see general increases over the years, and a bit of a larger adjustment in 2025 related to the vacancy rates and just increased cost to the contract.
Okay.
And over to our fiscal services. So we've got the total revenues and cost recoveries here. And in 2023, we had higher revenues, and transfers to reserves. That's related to the 3.3 million in the Growing Communities grant. So that's it for the base operating budgets. Again, those don't include the spending initiatives. Those are what makes up that 1.25% core budget change. And any operating spending initiatives would be in addition to those. So here we have the capital and major project plan for the next 5 years, the key projects. This is very similar to what was brought forward to the Finance Committee the first 2 weeks of October. It highlights some of our priority projects that are currently in the plan for the next 5 years. We have talked about some of these. Are there any further questions? Would you like me to highlight any of them? We're on page 46 for anyone that's on the paper.
Any comments, questions? Nope, seeing none.
So for the unfunded list, this is, again, very similar to the Finance Committee meetings, the pre-budget meetings in October. I did add one item here, which is the wastewater treatment plant phase 2 and 3. Other than that, everything else remains the same. So right now we have phase 1 in the budget, but we don't have phase 2 and 3 in the budget.
What are the timelines on this? If anybody knows through the chair off the top of their head?
Through your worship to council, the next phases will be determined by federal regulation and compliance with that. At this time, with the phased approach, we will be allowed to continue to discharge some phosphorus into the LSO for a period of time, as that does supplement Arrow Lake's nutrients. And with hydro, puts some oil phosphorus in every year. And so we've got some lead time here to allow for that requirement to come into place. I'm anticipating in the next 10 to 15 years will probably be.
Oh, that's perfect. Appreciate it.
Okay. Here we have the list of spending requests for capital with the rating matrix next to them. This is the same list that was brought forward to the Finance Committee in October. We'll move on to page 49, which is the water operating or capital fund, sorry. And in here, I have added the two DCC projects of many that are there, but two of the larger ones where we require the DCC bylaw to be updated in order to utilize TCC funds for these. Moving on to page 50, we have the Big Eddy Water. It's still just this one project related to upgrading pipes. And for page 51 is the sewer capital fund and projects for the next 5 years. So in here we have multiple DCC projects, specifically the wastewater treatment plant upgrade. Phase 1, this is the 18 million that has been added to 2025.
It's great to see that back in there.
Yeah.
So appreciate that. Thank you, Bill.
And then we have the vehicle and equipment capital plan. I don't have them itemized out, however, I do have a graph, and we spend about 1.1 million to 1.5 million a year. The darker bars are related to the fire fleet, and the lighter bars are the rest of the vehicle and equipment. Moving on to page 53. We've got a summary of last year's increases plus the draft increases for this year and what this equates to in transfers to reserves for each of the funds between general and utilities. Moving on to page 54, I've got a graph showing our projected reserves and surplus balances for the next 5 years. As you can see, it is growing. However, this is to help pay and save for that unfunded list. Here we have Revelstoke's debt. So at the end of 2024, our debt is approximately 9.6 million. You do see it increase in 2026, this larger red bar here. This is related to the debt that is required for the wastewater treatment plant upgrade. Right now, we're estimating about 4.2 million, and the city has an active borrowing bylaw for up to 7 million. And you see over the years, the debt fall off in 2024 or 2044, sorry. And the annual debt servicing costs, right now we pay about $1 million in principal and interest payments. And you see these kind of fall off quite a bit around 2032 to 2036. in about 5 years, we'll have quite a bit of debt maturing on our books. All right. So this takes me to the appendices. These are the operating spending initiatives that are all consistent in Appendix A with what was brought forward to the Finance Committee. So unless there's any questions about specifics on these, I won't get into those details since we've already discussed.
Thanks.
Any comments, questions, council? Senor, let's move.
Okay. And I won't go through these in detail as there's a lot of numbers. However, this is, if you are interested, this is the 15-year plan for all of the funds
Based
are attached in the appendices. So this is page 59, they start. Appendix B is the general operating fund. But it's a lot of numbers on the screen, so I won't go through those.
Yeah.
And then the other appendice that I wanted to highlight for you is the comparative benchmarks. So starting on page 65. For those of you that are looking, and this would be not a folded one, it's just a regular page. Okay. So every year we try to compare ourselves to other communities in terms of taxation, utility fees. The question is always, who do we compare ourselves to? For the most part, what we've done is we've looked at proximity, population, and tourism. So the municipalities that we used last year, and I use the same ones this year, are Castlegar, Fernie, Golden, Kimberley, Nelson, Salmon Arm, and Tofino. And so as we go through these, Revelstoke is the gray bar, and everyone else. So cash and investments on hand, we're about in the middle.
Just for clarity, if I can, to the chair, is it supposed to be 2022?
Yes. So the province releases statistics publicly for all of municipalities. And for the assets and liabilities, they have only released up to the 2022 year end, even though all local governments should have their 2023 financials audited and completed and submitted. So
It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So we've got total debt outstanding. Oopsies. So we are a little bit higher than our neighboring communities, but Salmon Arm seems to have significantly more. The annual debt servicing costs are similar to the graph above. We have higher debt, we have higher debt servicing costs. I've got the population where we're about in the middle, maybe a little bit on the high end in comparison to these communities. And then I find this one interesting. It's the per capita debt outstanding. And keep in mind, this is based off of census population. So it might be a little skewed for Revelstoke, but per person per census, we have $1,400 of debt outstanding on the books at the end of 2022. And you see other communities like Salmon Arm, even though their debt's much higher, their per capita is lower.
So if I pay my $1,400 this year, does that clear me off for a while?
We've got the average value of a representative house, and this is 2024 data now. So we are on the higher end. Fernie is at 908,000 and Tofino's all the way up to 1.8 million.
That's interesting. Wow. I didn't know it was that high.
Still get townhouses there for
Wow.
50. This is the size of this room.
Our 2024 user fees and parcel taxes on a representative house, so this is for a single family home. We are on the higher end in terms of our user fees, for sure, to the comparator communities.
Is that based, and that's per house or is that based per value of house?
That is per house. No secondary suite, just one set of residential utilities. So one water fee, one sewer fee, sewer parcel.
Do you
tax.
have the data on how much that's skewed between user fees and parcel taxes?
Parcel taxes is about $300 of that. However, other communities have parcel taxes included in those numbers.
That was my next question, so.
Okay. So for municipal taxes only, we're right in the middle of the average house paid 2,140 municipal taxes. This does not include what we collect for other authorities. This is municipal only.
Go ahead.
For clarification,
Yeah.
again, this is per household, not per value of household.
Correct. This is per representative household. And the representative household is 839,000.
Right.
I get asked all these questions all the time, so that's why I want to clarify now, so I don't provide incorrect information later on. I can just say, go to hour 6 of our meeting.
Yeah.
It feels like hour 6.
And then our total taxes and charges. So this is where it's a bit interesting. We're actually right in the middle. So this includes everything that we collect for other authorities, for the municipality, for user fees, for utilities. And a lot of that is likely due to in other communities, their rural district will provide more services and then requisition more, where in our situation, we provide more services and they requisition less. So the total bill on a representative home of 839,000 in 2024 was about 5,200. And we're right in the middle of the comparator communities there. So that takes us to the end of the document. And the motions that are on the table for council. So the next steps would be to go to community engagement for the 3 scenarios and the utility user rate increases. We do need the utility user rates increased prior to the new year. So it doesn't always line up perfectly. However, garbage rates are the only ones that are going up significantly in comparison to the other ones. The scenarios are the 6%, which is recommended, and the 5% and 4% scenarios. We're also requesting that council include the operating capital major spending packages for public comment and feedback. So those are the new operating spending initiatives and the new capital spending initiatives. And then we're also looking for endorsement to proceed with public engagement in person on November 28th.
All right, so we have these motions. Councilor Lusso?
Just a question through the chair.
Sure.
With the 6% increase to taxes, what would be the arena redevelopment reserve fund? What would that be sitting at around 2030? And what would it be sitting at now with no increase? And then what would the total be with the 2% increase?
Okay. So the arena redevelopment in 2030 without an increase, so this is the base budget, is at 7.4 million. And then
Average it. That's probably enough, right? Yeah.
Could repaint it.
What, a mini rink?
And so the with the 2%, this would be an additional $322,000 transferred to the reserve over the next 5 years, equating to 1.6 million.
So you're roughly 9.
Yeah,
Short answer, not enough and not enough.
Yeah,
yeah,
Okay.
about 9 million.
cool, thank you.
But we're getting there.
Councillor Stickhurst.
Several questions if I may. Going back to page 11, looking at the taxation rate for commercial, have we looked at, how are we breaking down the commercial taxes? Have we looked at shifting the taxes from industrial, commercial, and institutional and looking at the recreational taxes and seeing how that's going to impact the local businesses?
Through the chair. So in 2023, we did a bit more of a detailed review with scenarios of what it would look like to shift between specifically business and residential. I then brought those back to the finance committee in August as a bit of a refresher and reminder of what it could look like. And then at the November finance committee meeting, I plan to bring forward, based off of previous committee motions, what it would look like to shift between some of the other classes like recreation and light industrial. And in terms of wanting to shift in 2025, that conversation would need to be finalized in April.
Thank you.
Follow up.
Follow up in regards to the questions in regards to the arena, just, do we have any anticipation of what the cost for operating a new multiplex facility would be on the overall budget? Because I think building something is one thing and then operating it is a completely separate animal. So what would that overall impact be?
Any idea?
Through the chair, that's something that we will need to work through with the consultants. So right now that we're working through the capital costs, and then we'll move over to the operating. We would take the existing operating budget for the arena and continue it for the next building. However, whether or not that needs to be increased and how much, we would need to determine further in the process. And I think it would also be impacted by what type of facility is built or to what extent the facility is built. So further conversations and need to be had. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Anything else, Council?
No, thank you.
Any other comments from councillors before I ask for motion to put on the table? Councillor Lund, you have a comment?
Sure, yeah, just a general question to the chair. And thanks to Director Moore for providing the explanation about how DCC budgeting works within the document here. My question is focused on just sort of a more concise explanation of how it works, and since we are not there yet, we haven't completed our update yet, what the scenarios work. So I'm basically looking at what it's based on right now, and how much changes in what is proposed would affect things moving forward. Through the chair.
Through Chair. So the current, and hopefully I'm answering your question correctly, through the current base budget that is before you, I have reviewed the proposed DCC rates and the proposed DCC projects. And essentially with DCCs, I have gone through and increased the amount that we're collecting every year based off of increased DCC rates. And then I went through and I added a series of projects to be funded through DCCs. Sometimes the DCC funds don't always have enough funds by that point in order to complete the project. However, DCCs can internally borrow from each other. So if the roads has 10 million and water only has 5 million, but water needs a $10 million DCC project completed, we can then borrow from the roads DCC fund internally and pay it back. So the base budget, it's a preliminary starting point based off of the proposed listing and rates in front of council. Once it all gets adopted, we would be able to have a more we'd start working on a more accurate long-term plan for it. Where right now, we need to get it in the budget in order for the province to sign off on the bylaw. It needs to be in our long-term financial plan. And Director Black and myself have done our best to kind of slot things in, based off of what was proposed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Councilor Chair.
Thanks. Thanks, Marcel. If I get to the chair, I have a bit of a pointed question. I don't know if you've done this or run the scenario. To Director Moore. By chance, have you looked at what a 2% annual increase every year to 2030 looks like for the Arena Redevelopment Fund? On the sense of long-term planning for a structure that is clearly needs it.
Through the chair, I did work through that last year just to try and see where we would end up. And it's difficult to pinpoint it all because you have to start paying for design and architectural costs prior, and until we really know what facility we're going for and what the costs are, and when we're spending funds, it's hard to track that reserve accurately. However, from a quick math type of thing, if every year you're adding, $320,000, that was
Well, I meant an extra 2%.
an extra 2% every year, right?
Mhm.
So that's your transfer grows every year. So right now it would go up to around 1 million, and then the next year it's 1.3 million, and then 1.6 million, and so on. So I'd imagine that we get to, without me doing the math right here quickly, probably around, instead of 9 million, we get to maybe 13 to 15 million. Which, yeah,
Still 40 million short.
yeah.
By 2030, it'll be a lot
more.
How hard is it to build a warehouse with a reefer unit? Sorry, how expensive is it? Sorry, guys, I'm just looking for some long-term planning here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think from a planning point of view with tax increases, once we have a better handle on what the community is willing to accept and what facility is chosen and what the costs around it are, since costs have been so volatile in the last few years related to construction,
Yeah.
it will make it a lot easier for staff to come back and say, okay, here are the required tax increases in order to get there for the next 5 years. However, right now, the target just isn't specific enough for us to really massage that out.
Okay.
Follow
Well, I kind of like to put this on the table with a change, and I just want council to know that we're not voting on a change right now. It's just a change on how it's written. If I can. I move that the financial plans and the highlights within the financial plans be circulated for public feedback and comments, including increases as follows. The only change I'd like to see is to drop the 4% increase scenario and add a 7% increase scenario with that extra percent going into the Arena Redevelopment Fund.
No.
Can you bring that back up on the screen for me?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Just wanted Michelle to see if people were voting.
We're not voting on it, it's just.
Just a conversation. So essentially right now, if I'm understanding Councillor Cherry correctly, right now we have the 4, 5, and 6%, but 6 being the recommended, and you're.
I'd like to see a 5, 6, and 7, with 7, the actual percent on 7 being going towards the Arena Redevelopment. And then everything else as written.
Sure, and I'll make a motion for 3, 4, and 5.
We vote on this first.
So essentially in here, if I bring up this breakdown of the taxes, it would be 5, 6, and 7%. We would, with that scenario, we get rid of the 4, and down here it'd be 1, 2, and 3% for the arena.
Correct. If anybody seconds it.
And for clarification, just for the committee of the whole, last year, the scenarios that went for public feedback were 3, 5, and 7%.
And then the end result was there was a good number that liked the 7%. We ended up choosing 5, correct? Okay. So you put this motion on the table. Is there anyone willing to second this motion? Councillor Devlin? And now, any comments on the motion?
Yeah, I just
And
think,
so, yeah, can you?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
my only comment is, I think we gotta get serious about planning on what to do with that arena. It's been since, I believe, 2013, since the damning structural engineer report came out on it. It's 11 years ago. Yes, we as council have started putting money away for it, but prior to our 10 years of tenureship, there was $0 put away for it. I think we need to catch up. And I just want to see what that scenario looks like and seek public feedback on that change.
Any comments from Councillor Devlin?
Yeah, I'll comment on it. I think we've seen that no matter what sort of arena, what sort of multiplex, what sort of scenario we inevitably go with, either way, we have nowhere near enough money, other than, as you kind of jokingly said, a shed with a, refrigerator in it is about what we can afford in 2030 at the current rate we're going. So I'm willing to float the idea past the public and see what they say. It's not a vote to do it. It's letting the public know that if this is something they want to see, then that should be an idea that they support with their voices, and I will make my vote according to what the public say. And if they don't have an appetite for that, then I'm fine with not doing it. But I think putting it out there is a pretty good plan.
Any other comments from Councillor Stigler?
I'd be willing to support it if we maintained the current proposed tax increases with the addition of the 7%, as you've mentioned, just so that way the public has the most information available for them and they can look at the cost implications of what they're voting on. But I think giving them 5, 6, and 7, I think I'd have a hard time with that as it's proposed.
And so you'd like to see it 4, 5, 6, and 7?
Sure, certainly.
The only reason why I wouldn't want to see it amended to show the 4%, because that has 0 going to the arena redevelopment.
But I think
Just
that's
us losing an asset.
I think that's something for the public to weigh in on.
No long-term planning for the facility?
That's up for the public.
Any other comments from councillors? So Councillor Devlin, and then I'll go to Councillor Lando.
Yeah, just as perhaps a comment on compromise, perhaps a 4, 6, and 7 and drop the 5, as that seems like a weird middle ground that isn't really necessary. If we're going to say either more or none, then maybe those should be the options we present. I guess my hesitance is we could literally name any number and we could go anywhere from 1 to 10% if we wanted to give them all the options. I agree with more options being good, but there comes a point where too many options is just indecisive. So.
Yeah, it becomes confusing. Councillor Orlando.
Your worship, thank you. I have a question for Director Moore to the chair. And just for clarity, the existing arena capital fund allocation that is carrying forward each year, I was looking is around 770,000. So if we were to not increase the amount, that would still continue. So there is existing 770,000. What percentage would that equal this year in terms of overall tax increase?
Like if we were to do another 770,000?
No, just right now, like if we were to subtract that, that would be an X percentage decrease. I'm not proposing that, but just for math's sake.
Roughly 5.5% to 6%.
4.7. So within the current budget, another way of stating that is there is a 4.7% increase for just for that allocation.
From previous years, correct?
Yeah, from previous years. Yeah, excellent. So. And your worship, just if I get to comment, and thanks for that. I think everyone probably agrees, and feel free to disagree with me, as I think Councillor Devlin has said just previously, that no matter what we do or what arena we build or what facility we go forward with, we're not on path to have enough saved up to pay for it outright in the near 5-10 year time frame. So I just want to recognize that. And as we are already putting 770,000 in there, my question is this is just as an update for staff. We've been at this for about 2 years now on this council, and my question is, when is the estimate when we will arrive at sort of the business plan side? And I don't know who this is for, of taking a hard look at the numbers. Currently, we're in the sort of facility planning phase, but what about the question of viability going forward? And at that point, once we get there and complete that planning, how much is the anticipated cost for the project up until then, soft cost on planning costs?
Anyone have any comment? Mr. Brown?
Through the chair, do you want me to try, Lori, based on our conversation with HCMA the other day?
Yes.
Yeah, and you correct me if so be it. So we met yesterday morning with our consultants, and it was suggested when you looked at the schedule on the survey and going out to the public to advance and sort of accelerate the actual cost and the scoping of costs on what a facility would look like, so we get an idea of sort of what a class D would look like. So we're trying to advance that further because there has been a delay, like any major capital project. And so I think the plan is to run a concurrent process, correct, Lori? And we're hoping to get before council an idea of what a class D would look like on a said facility under the couple of scenarios we're looking at, where we know we need an arena, we know we need some amenities. And so what do those costs look like for the benefit of the committee, for the benefit of the public and council? Because it's something that the director of finance is also asking for, just like a second fire hall. What are the anticipated, at least class D estimates, so we can plug it into the budget? So in short, we're hoping to have that by ballpark the new year. So that did come up yesterday. So a great question. And I'm looking forward to seeing those numbers myself.
Okay. Yeah. Follow?
No, I don't have a follow-up question, but just in general, like I'm happy with asking residents what they think as we put scenarios forward. Like last year, I will point out, and staff actually pointed it out, that the number of people who provide feedback on the budget make it statistically not realistic to extrapolate community feeling, and it is just hard to get people to give feedback. And so 50 people write in and they're all for scenario X, Y, or Z. That's not really representative of that scenario. So I think at the end of the day, the decision comes down to council as to where we go on this one. My general statement is, I'm happy for people to look at it and chat about it and hopefully have input from some of the groups that traditionally give input on the budget, but we will be looking at that decision. And the reason I bring up the question about business planning for the project is the only source of funding for this is not the taxpayer. So I want to get to that stage where we are looking at other sources of funding. And one of my ongoing concerns that I think would be for any facility that we're building is it going to be financially viable to operate? What is our ongoing operating costs going to be for the facility? I don't know what our costs are now. It's I'm sure park staff would know, but it's a significant annual cost, and there's not really there's been examples in other parts of the province where people splashed on a big arena and the team couldn't afford to stay there or didn't stick around, or the revenue anticipated was not near what was going on. And so that sort of long-term liability is what I'm concerned about. But I'm happy to put scenarios out there, and I do favor sort of more the idea of putting the full spread of scenarios on there for people to take a look at.
Okay, thank you for the comment. Councilor Lusat, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I think that having the 7% scenario out there for the public is good. I feel that the 4% scenario, though it's good for the public to see that, I think as council, that's not us taking on the responsibility of planning for this new arena. But if we want to have that scenario out there for the public to weigh in on, I'm fine with that.
Okay. So the motion on that, Mr. Moore.
Sorry, I just wanted to provide something for you to think about over the next few months is the new construction revenue we have in the budget is set at 250,000. It is conservative. I don't know exactly where it will end up. However, if it is more than the 250,000 come the new year, and come April, that's a conversation that we can have of where to allocate the increased tax revenue above and beyond the budget. So something to think about as you're how we save for the arena and when and where we put the funds aside.
Perfect. All right, thank you. So just want to reiterate, the motion on the table is property tax, 6, 7, and 8, pardon me.
5, 6,
7. Scenarios, garbage rates will stay at 10%, water rates 5%, 5% for Big Eddy Water, and sewer user rates, frontage rates stay at 5%. So that's the scenario that's on the table right now. So I'm going to call the question on that. Do you have a comment, Councillor Leno? before?
Yeah, Your Worship, just a quick question. Some councillors were discussing different scenarios and wondering if people want to move forward with adding a 4% through to 4 through 7. I'm not
Is there an amendment or a friendly amendment? That scenario work from corporate concern, Mr. Parliament?
I believe so.
Like we can amend the, yeah, so it'd be 4 to 7% scenarios.
And
So is that okay with the mover and the seconder?
Yeah, just waiting for someone to make a friendly amendment.
Okay, so we're gonna go 4, 5, 6, 7.
Cool. Yeah. All right.
All right,
Does it overdo your documents having that fourth column? Perfect.
all right, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously, so for the record, Ms. Floyd, we will go 4, 5, 6, 7% scenarios to go out to the public. All the other things stay the same.
With the 7% being a 3% increase to the redevelopment.
Right, yes.
Ms. Beckler, you have that for the minutes?
Yes, Your Worship.
You appreciate that. All right, item number 2, does someone want to put that on financial plan stuff? Councillor Cherry?
That the financial plans, including the operating and capital / major project spending packages be presented to the public. Be presented for public comment and feedback.
Seconder for the motion, Councillor Devlin. Any further comment on that motion, Councillor Lucelle?
Thanks, Marcel. Just a question through to Director Donato. How has the discussion with the Roller Derby Association gone with the increased service level for the arena?
Through your worship, to Councillor Lucy, I have met with a few different organizations to determine if there was an alternate space for them to practice in, and it is challenging based on the floor surfaces that all these buildings have. That is the biggest stumbling block right now is, in particular with the school surface, the wood floors are not conducive to the rollerblade wheels. And I know they have different sets of wheels and it goes between plastic and rubber. But in speaking with some of the manufacturers of these floors, they do have concerns with the use of those wheels on the floor surface and the damage that could occur to the floor. We're experiencing that with the rec center as well with the flooring system we have there. So it has been a bit challenging finding an alternate practice space for them. However, we can definitely trial some things out for the upcoming year, so I don't expect significant impact.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right. I will call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Item number 3.
Oh, I'll just finish it off.
Okay.
Move that public engagement session be scheduled for Thursday, November 28th.
Oh, that's right. Do you mind? I updated it.
You updated it?
Got times in there.
Well, I take it back. I move that public engagement session be scheduled from noon till 1:30 PM and 5 till 6:30 PM on Thursday, November 28th in the MP1 room located at the Revelstoke Community Center.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Lucille. Any further discussion on this motion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Moore. I appreciate you and your staff and all the work to get this to council. Thank you, council, for taking the time to be here today. It's a special meeting to get this done so that Ms. Moore can actually move forward with that public engagement. And I'm grateful for all of that. So I'm going to ask, call for a motion to terminate. Councilor Stapenhurst, Councilor Devlin, all in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you all for your time today. Thank you, staff, for being present. We are done. Thank you.
Great.